So, it was by accident, but it's rather ironic that today's story from the Bible, as y'all may know, we're doing a series 5 weeks on reading a Bible story and then talking about it, which is new for me. I know it seems kind of surprising, but usually we start with a theme and just bring the Bible in to supplement. This way we're starting with the Bible and working out. And the story, we had like 5 stories. We just assigned them to different weeks. It turns out this week is about the woman caught in adultery. I don't know, it's Valentine's Day. I don't know. I thought it was a little ironic. Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives, but early the next morning, he was back again at the temple. A crowd soon gathered, and he sat down and taught them. As he was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman they had caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd. "Teacher," they said to Jesus, "this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say?" They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him, but Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. They kept demanding an answer, and he stood up again and said, "All right, stone her. But let those who have never sinned throw the first stone." Then he stooped down again and wrote in the dust. When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Then Jesus stood up again and said, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." Now, I like this story. The scholars say that this was probably added afterwards. It's not written in the same vernacular that the rest of the Gospel of John is written in. And the earliest text that we can find doesn't have it in it, but that doesn't make it any worse for me. I think it's a beautiful story. And I especially like the part where they come to Jesus and they said, "What should we do with this woman?" And he knows he's in hostile territory and they're trying to trap him, but he's cool as a cucumber. He just starts writing his finger in the dust. And have you ever been under a lot of pressure and somebody wants an answer from you right away and the whole of the world seems to be leaning into you to do something? Don't you need to do something right now? And you go, "Nah, I think I'll think about it for a minute." And you just take your time to investigate what you're feeling, what maybe something higher in you has to say. Maybe you just go, "I don't know. I'm not going to say anything till I do." And you just wait. I think this could be part of the mystery about this story that can really teach us. We don't know what he was doing other than writing or moving his finger in the dust. And first of all, you think about the symbolism of the dust. He's in the temple, and the temple must be filled with dust. Old, tired ideas, dusty ideas. And here's Jesus, the new guy. They want to catch him in doing something wrong so they can say that he was not upholding the Jewish law, or if he said kill her, he would not be upholding the Roman law, because the Romans won't let the Jews kill anybody on their own. So he's kind of caught in the middle. There's no good way to get out of this with a yes or no answer. So he lets them ponder it themselves. And can you imagine what the scene is if they're in a temple, they brought a woman directly from adultery to the temple, and she must be freaked. And the people must be in such an awkward and ugly moment. And to have to sit with that while he thinks or waits until something comes to him. Or maybe he just waits until they realize how ridiculous this situation is, how badly they have played it to this point. To bring a woman into this setting and to consider stoning her for something it wasn't even hurting anyone else, probably right there. Maybe somebody else's feelings were hurt, but in that moment, it was just a projection of their own guilt onto her that had brought the viciousness and the willingness to kill somebody, because from their insides they were projecting onto the scene in front of them, I can get rid of my guilt by killing her. Now think of it. When we're living our lives and we have a sense of guilt inside us, and that guilt could come from almost any place, and I'm going to talk about the guilt a little later, but just this guilt, sense of guilt that something is, we have done something wrong. How many of us prefer not to confess to ourselves we did something wrong, but to say, oh, I can't stand it when they act like that? I was listening to Brene Brown. Brene Brown is always good to listen to. And she was talking about how in this country these days, one side gets really incensed when someone says something condemning of their side, but feels free to condemn the other side with his malicious tone and idea that they must be crazy for being the way they are. There must be something seriously wrong with them. They must be a bad human being. They must be against this country. However it is voiced, it is saying that the other is different and the other should be condemned. And so this projection of our own internal upset with ourselves, we project outward so that we don't have to experience that self-condemnation and that sense of guilt we have for what we have been doing, for our laziness, our ugliness, our meanness, our violence, whatever. We project it out and we say we must kill them. How many of our movies are really based on this idea that the other guy must be destroyed? Good and evil, black hat and white hat cowboys, the vengeful, righteous destroyer of evil. And we take that as good versus evil. Could it be that really it's not good versus evil, it's our projection of our own guilt to another, and it is cathartic, we think, to destroy the other. But we do not ever, by that, liberate ourselves from our own sense of wrong. You cannot kill another to free yourself. You know, it's Black History Month, so maybe it would be good to hear from Martin Luther King. I decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. And yet we are making it such a game, such a habit to despise, condemn, to be vulgar to other people. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. And what is love? Obviously, from this story, many forms of love, some of whom are acceptable and some are not so pretty. Some of them are universal and some are directed to just one person at a time. But the love we're talking about here is this general desire for the outcome to be good, a general desire for the person, whether they're likable or not, to have the peace, the happiness, the prosperity, to do well with their life, even if you don't like them, even if they are your enemy. To love them, not because they deserve it, in the sense of they've done you well, but to love them because this is the attitude, the feeling state, the mental condition that frees us both from the toxic world we live in. That when we provide love to someone, to this circumstance, instead of hate, we begin to provide the conditions, the soil in which everybody can be reformed. Love your enemy, and they have a much better nutrition for improving their mind and soul than if you hate them. And when we hate, isn't it a burden, as MLK would say? Isn't it a burden to hate somebody? Does not the burn happen in our own hearts? And is that not where it hurts the most? Is here. And forgiveness is the same thing. When we condemn another, are we not just carrying a painful burden? Overused, but I'll use it again. Buddha, once asked about forgiveness, said, "Unforgiveness is holding hot coals in your hand so that you can throw them." And in another place, unforgiveness is swallowing poison, hoping the other person will die. And so we practice unforgiveness and hatred at our own cost, at our own peril. And so this crowd comes to Jesus, hoping for a cathartic experience of their own guilt and anger. And they think they've got this guy, so he can't win. And what does he do to them? Rather than shout or yell, he just absorbs the moment and lets the vitriol pass and writes his finger in the dust until the moment comes that is pregnant with possibility. And then he says, "Okay, you have your laws, but let the one who has never sinned be the first one to throw a stone." Wouldn't we be smarter, better citizens, husbands, children, cousins, whatever, if we would remember that little secret? That the first of us to throw the stone needs to be sinless, never having done anything like that. Wouldn't we be quieter, kinder, simpler? And so this idea of condemning, and lately I've been hearing story after story of families being like this, where families are giving you a hard time, and there's no room left for healing because the hearts have hardened into positions. And though the words may not actually be said, the thoughts fill the room, right? So we're all guilty, aren't we? At least of throwing the stones internally. As a matter of fact, we can hardly walk around. We have so many rocks in our pockets ready to go, you know. To be forewarned is to be forearmed, and here we are. And so This story, I think, in its subtle sweetness to me, is this delicate position Jesus is in for his own safety, but better, he turns the moment and tells the crowd to investigate their own life and to live from that place. And when it is done, there's nobody left to condemn, and neither is Jesus they are condemning. So could it be that all our fears of being so guilty and unforgivable really are not true? We hired somebody recently, Sophia, to run social media for us, and she took a little statement, a 1 minute part of my one talk, and she put this line on there, we are, because I said it in there somewhere, that we are not the worst thing we have ever done. And within like a few days, it had 5,000 hits. So you think about that. Don't we all want to hear that? We are not the worst thing we have ever done. We have all made mistakes. It's part of the game. It's why we're here. We're ridiculously, inevitably, consistently, and persistently given to making mistakes. And the only thing that can keep us moving on to the next thing is giving ourselves some slack to hear the words of Jesus. Does anybody here condemn you? Nope, nobody. Well, then neither do I. So why don't you just get about it and don't do it again? And move on from where we have been. You know, the Course in Miracles is a fantastic and difficult book. And many people can only stand it so long. In part because it just continually pushes back on the idea that we have the right to condemn. It just categorically says every time you're condemning, you're only condemning yourself because you're coming from a place in which you think you're already born guilty. And I've often thought that the reason why Christianity told that story that you're born into sin was because it really fit the way we feel. Don't you often feel like you just something wrong? You did something wrong. There's something wrong with you. Like deep down, like kind of ugly. You don't want the world to know, so you put on a good face, etc. And then finally it all collapses and you go, I need help. And so then you say, there must be a Savior who can save me because I can't seem to do it myself because I've never been able to get rid of this guilt. Right? And so they say that Jesus must have died for your sins. They must have killed him so that I could live. Then we need a story that explains the problem and it gives us a solution. And that formula has gone viral. The world has, well, 1 billion people have decided it's right. And the Course in Miracles comes in with a little twist on that and says basically, the reason you feel that way is one time in a place beyond time, before time, outside of time. You had a thought. You had a thought you could be separate from God. You had that thought. And you forgot to laugh. And so you went, I have rejected God. I'm separate. God must be angry with me. I had better be very afraid. And we use guilt as a way of feeling what we think God will do. We just feel guilty because we want to get guilty before he punishes us. And we run from the experience of grace because we are afraid that we have rejected God. And so we project it onto God. God is rejecting us. God is angry with us. And there's no way for us to be happy again because we are deathly afraid. So we filled with guilt, and so because we can't stand the guilt, we project it on someone else. And therefore we perceive the world through the lens of guilt, and we see the world as a difficult place because we have forgotten who we are. That we and the one presence are the same, And we always have been, but we have forgotten because somewhere before time, we forgot to remember that we could not be separate from that. That we are never separate from God, from the whole spirit of the whole of everything. And this separation from God is a figment of our imagination, but it makes us afraid and guilty. And we can't stand it. So we project it on others and condemn them. And we become violent and irritable and angry, all the while seeing the world as a dangerous place, as a difficult place, a place that requires sacrifice for anything to happen. We see the world not as it is, but as we are. And the Course in Miracles, the reason it's so difficult is at some point you have to make a jump out of this world and take the radical position that you never left God, nor has God ever left you. Or as Jesus says in this passage, neither do I condemn you. Never have I. Go and sin no more. Forget your separateness. Return to wholeness. And the Course would say this, that this decision is made outside of time, so you can't really get there from here. You need to really allow the whole Spirit of God to work with your mind, to remind you. You need that grace, so that's what you ask for. That you awaken to your true nature, that you and the divine are always, and always have been, one. And go and sin no more. And stop believing it. Stop doing that. It's causing you and everyone around you pain. Come to terms with your false idea that you're separate, that you are a body, that you are your mind, your tiny mind, and join back with the one presence as your true identity. That's all it asks, but it requires us to give up everything we have thought before. Every sin we have had before has been a sin of believing we were separate. And so the Course would say, come to your senses. Its favorite story is the prodigal son. Come home. So this story, which is purported to be about Jesus, that was probably written over 90 years after he died, may or may never have happened. It doesn't really matter. What really matters is that we learn the lesson. Just as the people who brought the woman to Jesus. It doesn't really matter what was. Have you learned the lesson? Have you awakened to your true identity? Have you learned to condemn no one? Because we're all under the same foolish thought that we could be separate from God. This is the lesson, I think, of the woman caught in adultery. She's not the worst thing she ever did. She's like us, on the path to remembering. Let us pray. Let's start with a sense of gratitude that we're here, just here, that it's safe and warm and dry. And that we're close to people who are on the path, whose intent is to sin no more. To draw us ever closer to each other through our sense of love and affection, but also to awaken to our divine nature. May this be the moment in time that we correct the decision made beyond time. That we are alone, separate, wrong. And remember that we are one with the presence, the one presence. And all that we have projected and all we have experienced is but a dream of separateness. Let us return home and be at peace. And so it is.
I hope you got something out of today's service. We intend to bring you things that will help you in your life become more of who you want to be, give you the freedom of forgiveness and the hope of expectancy that your life will unfold in a way that brings you joy, happiness, and is a contribution to the world. If you would like to contribute to this ministry, please go to unitytriangle.org, hit the donate button, and it will lead you into an easy way of doing that. We thank you for your attention and look forward to seeing you again here.